is. Okay, got new people in the class this week. Welcome. Very happy to have you all. Let me review what we did last week very quickly, if I can. I can't do anything very quickly. So basically, these are the things that we noticed as a class and wrote down. If you want to add something, you feel free to do so. I'll put it up there. But we noticed that there was one language, and that seemed to be a major point as the story began, that everybody had one language, that they moved east or moved in the east or something about movement and east. And we talked about the fact that many times in the Old Testament, a movement of the east had something to do with something negative, something like exile or being sent away. Adam and Eve move east of Eden. Cain goes east, even from there after he kills Abel. The prophets talk about Israel going to the east when they talk about exile, or to the north, which is also to the east, because when they go to the north, the point is to go up around the Fertile Crescent and over to the eastern lands. Talk about a unity move, or that God came down. God came down to see what was going on at Babel, and that the people had a unity movement going. They were trying to hold themselves together in order to make a name for themselves. And they were going to build a city and build a tower, and they had invented bricks. We didn't spend any time talking about that, but that was a new technology as far as the Bible. It was presenting this idea that they were able to bake bricks. And then we talked about the fact that they want to make a name for themselves. This has something to do with their pride or their arrogance. And that God said they would be able to do anything they set their minds to. And I guess I just want to make sure that we're careful, that there's probably some hyperbole to that statement. I don't think God was saying that they'll build a rocket, this particular group of people, but maybe building rockets is actually indicative of how far humans are capable of doing things. Something to think about. God scatters them. He scatters the people. And that, we talked about the fact, is a fulfillment of what God had commanded people, beginning with Genesis 1 at the end, when he says to be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. And this idea of spreading Eden, the beautiful land, across the land, that as they multiply and expand, it would expand this beautiful world God had created. And we talked about purpose. What was the purpose of this? Sorry, letting people in. What was the purpose of scattering the people? What was the purpose of them trying to build the tower? And what's going on there? What's involved in that story? Then we went to Acts chapter 2, and I asked the question, because I have taught it this way many times, is Acts chapter 2 actually a reversal of the Genesis story? We had one language becomes many languages, and then we have many languages that come together as one group. We have this coming to Jerusalem. So they're coming from the east and the north and the west and the south, and they're coming and joining in Jerusalem. Let me ask everybody on Zoom, make sure you're on mute, because I heard like a buzz background there. I don't know. Somebody's shaving with an electric razor or something. God comes down in this story as well. There is unity in the middle of this diversity. We have all these different ethnic groups named in Acts chapter 2, and yet they come together in unity. And of course, that story continues. And by the way, DeRay pointed out at the very end of the class last week that as we read on in the chapters, God ends up scattering these people again, because they all kind of want to stay in Jerusalem. And in this case, we noted they make a name they're interested in making a name for God, not in making a name for themselves. And that this is very, very different, but there is a name making element of what's happening at Pentecost. So let me pause right there and ask if there's comments, questions, things that you want to talk about before we go on in the story. Yes.
Not having been here for the last couple of weeks, but there's a huge difference in coming together in pride and coming together in utter absolute humility. These people at Pentecost were convicted. They were cut to the heart by Peter's words. They were destitute. They had nothing.
Yeah. So there's a coming together in pride and a coming together in humility. And that's what Bob's talking about. And I think that's very, very significant, that what is happening in Acts 2 is a remorse. We've killed Messiah, the hope of the world. Now, this is a very Jewish thing. So let's keep that in mind. We have great diversity, but they're all agreed on one thing in particular, and that is we were all looking for Messiah, even though there's great diversity among them. George, can I ask a huge favor of you? I left my Bible sitting just inside my door on a little bar stool, just like this one. Don't let the bird get you.
Bird.
Yeah, sorry, you're late. You don't get to hear it.
I know, there's nobody in the building to tell us where to go.
We'll tell you the bird story later.
Okay.
Now, Ronnie and Tammy rescued a Mississippi kite, and they're keeping it cool in my office.
Okay.
I hope it's in a cage and not just flying
Flying
around.
around.
No, we're not any poop all over your phone. Yeah, that's what I was afraid of. All right, so other comments. Acts chapter 2. What do you see significant here? Jim, you looked like you were about to say something.
For a change, no.
Okay. Thoughts? Really? Are you being bashful?
Covered it all last week.
We covered it all last week. We did not cover it all last week. Okay, there's an ability to do something here. What is this ability to do?
We don't know whether it's an ability to hear or an ability to see.
Okay, so what the text says is we're able to hear. Right? Does the text say that?
Yep, we can hear them in our own language.
We can hear them in our own languages. Okay. And then Duray's already pointed out, God's going to scatter this group too.
Where is that? Verse 6. Thank you.
Where is what?
Where it's heard in their own language. Well,
Verse 11.
I haven't gotten to that yet.
But verse 4 does say the apostles were able to speak in other languages.
Yes. No, the scattering's not going to happen for a couple chapters.
Okay. Oh, that's why I can't find it.
Yeah. No,
After this
not in
week,
this chapter.
Yeah, you have to go into all the world and go back and see. I don't know.
So I'll put chapter 7 and 8. Chapter 7's where they're gonna stone Stephen, right? And then they all start going home.
Okay.
After that. Okay,
But yeah, they go home from where they came from, but he also sends them out with something to do when they go home.
that's right.
Like,
And you know, and then the stories, all of the rest of the book of Acts are gonna be about the scatterings, right?
Right.
Are you with? The Ethiopian eunuch's gonna go down. I mean, Stephen is gonna go to the Ethiopian eunuch, and the Ethiopian eunuch's gonna carry the message down into Africa. And Paul is gonna go all through Asia Minor and over into Greece and all of those. That's all about the scattering. Okay, the whole book. And it's that spreading of that message. Okay. So the purpose, So again, I'm asking, I'm not telling, I don't know that the text, Acts 2 in particular, gives us what's the purpose of all this, except to say that in this instance, in the Babel story, the purpose on God's end seems to be to get the people to scatter and to form community groups across the land. And instead of staying in one place and creating a monolithic culture, a culture that is one language, and certain people will then, of course, be in power. And it's important to pay attention. Once you get the Babel story, then Babylon is going to become a metaphor for empire and the evils of empire. And I know we're not taught, I wasn't taught growing up to read the Bible and see how much empire, anti-empire language is in the Bible, but especially through the Old Testament, that's a major theme. So God is not interested in human beings gaining so much power that they have a tower to the heavens and that they somehow are able to control groups of people through this system. Now, I realize that feels like a very political way to read scripture, but I'm saying, take your time, go back and look through all of that, read the prophets, pay attention. It's hard. It's hard to read the prophets because we don't want to learn all the history. And so there's lots of names and lots of things happening, and it gets confusing, and we don't, wait, who's king, and which, is he a northern king, a southern king, and wait, which empire, and who's in power now, and who's the world power now, and why is it Assyria that takes the northern kingdom, and it's Babylon that takes the southern kingdom, and who are the Medes, and who are the Persians, and how does all that fit? But that is the flow of the Bible story. And so it's really important that we understand that all that begins at Babel. And so something's happening where God is trying to minimize this empire impulse. Yes, Rachel.
Just listening to you describe that made me think about when you said purpose for Acts 2 is for it to be God's empowered fight, where Jesus is king and people come together as one group for God, not.
I'm not stopping you, but I want to repeat what you just said.
Okay.
So I can remember that. If you want to say more in just a second, I just want to make sure people on Zoom hear it. Rachel is saying that's very interesting because it seems like this is about God creating God's empire. What does Jesus call it?
Kingdom.
Kingdom of heaven, right? The kingdom of heaven or the kingdom of God. And what does Jesus constantly try to say about the kingdom of heaven? It does not look like the kingdoms of the earth. So when we say that the purpose of Acts 2 is to establish the kingdom of heaven, we're not saying that is going to come overthrow the kingdoms of the world. In fact, the scattering is going to be about leaven worked through the lump of dough. It's going to be about salt mixed into the food. It's going to be about a mustard seed that somehow grows into a tree. And the birds from the countries come and land in the tree, which is, 19th century America. We wanted to take that parable and we wanted to talk about, we wanted to go find that Middle Eastern mustard plant that grew up really large that everybody thought of when Jesus told the story, because we're so literal. But Jesus is actually saying, I want you to imagine this weed that grows in everybody's garden turning into a giant tree, a banyan tree that all of the animals could move into. Okay. And so Jesus is saying something that is not natural, that the kingdom of heaven is not natural. It is something very supernatural. And it operates very, very differently. And that is a key to what we're saying here. So what I'm getting at is, for a long time, I said this was a reversal of this. This was taking us back to the original state of things. But I'm not saying that anymore. I'm reading this very differently. I'm saying this is, yes, it's God getting us back to Eden, but he's doing it by creating tiny Edens that are scattered throughout the world as we understand it, as opposed to bringing everything back to one place.
Do you record this class?
I am.
I think you should write this. I think you should write it.
Oh, there are many people who have written much better this stuff than I can do. Thank you, though. That's a sweet compliment. But all you are doing is complimenting my reading. So
So God is still telling us to go out and multiply and fill the earth
absolutely.
with his kingdom.
God wants us to, I'm going to repeat that just for the Zoom class. God wants us to continue to go out, multiply, fill the earth with the kingdom of heaven. Yes, absolutely. And I want to say this before I run out of time. Somebody tell me what time it is and keep me aware of the time. 10:04:05. Okay. I want to say that God is in favor of many languages. And that many languages is an indication that it is amazing that the disciples were speaking and everybody was hearing, right? But the important part is everybody was hearing in their heart language, in their native language. And I want to strongly emphasize that what is happening here is a move towards inclusion of multiple ethnic, and by ethnic, I'm talking about cultural. I'm not talking racial, but racial, of course, there are ethnicities along racial lines as well. But think all ethnics, all cultural expressions of humanity. This kingdom wants to move into all of those and mix them.
This makes me think of prayer. I mean, because the guy that's speaking Spanish down there, not that, in prayer, it's the same as me speaking English in prayer. You know what I mean? It's the guy in Taiwan that's talking to God in his native tongue is still offering a prayer, the same as all of us do. So
Absolutely.
I don't know if that ties in.
Well, to go along with that, some of the most meaningful.
Be a little bit louder so I won't repeat you.
To go along with that, some of the most meaningful prayer times I've ever experienced from someone who I had no idea what they were saying was praying. But my spirit was in it, nothing else. I mean, I was like, it didn't matter that I had no idea what they were saying. I was in total agreement with them, and it's a very powerful, moving experience. I mean, it's happened to me a couple of times, like on the South Texas trips in Haiti, places where, I'm one of the very few people who have no idea what's going on, but yet God uses it to minister to my heart, and it's very powerful. So
It's beautifully said. I'm gonna go ahead with a little bit of time we
I
have
have
left.
something that's.
Okay, go ahead.
Real quick. Okay. The purpose of both of those, to me, are exactly the same,
Okay,
in that, God has an overall intent. His goal is to, scatter the people, but unify the people for his glory.
right.
So he scatters them because they're not following his plan in Babel, but then he brings them back together and scatters them again so they can fulfill the ultimate goal of filling all the earth. And,
Yep. I
You
agree.
use the word unify. That's kind of what I was getting at with the prayer. The idea of prayer and everything is that prayer unifies us even if we don't speak the same language.
Okay, I'm gonna jump us to Acts 6 because I want to finish this class today. And I just have a few minutes. So in Acts 6, we've got two languages, Greek and Hebrew. I'm gonna just read it out of the Net Bible. If you see something in a different version that you want to point out, please feel free to jump in. Now, in those days when the disciples were growing in number, a complaint rose on the part of the Greek-speaking Jews against the native Hebraic Jews. So two languages, yes? Okay. Because their widows were being overlooked in the daily distribution of food. Whose widows?
Greek.
The Greek widows. And by the way, from Acts chapter 2, we have that whole long list of nations. Judea, that's the Hebraic Jews. All the rest of them are Greek-speaking Jews. Okay, so all of those. So this really lists two languages, but Greek-speaking means lots of ethnicities. Okay, lots of hometowns, lots of favorite recipes, lots of dress styles. This is a wide variety of people. Okay.
Is it dialects?
I mean, yes and no, but I mean, they're all speaking Greek, but yes, I'm sure there's some dialect going on. Okay, so the Greek widows are not getting food, but all the Hebraic widows are getting food. Why is that?
Prejudice.
Well, it's because, yeah, we can say prejudice, I would agree, but it's not intentional prejudice. What we have here is the food is coming from the Hebrew speaking Jews. They're the ones who have the food. They're the ones who have the, rewards membership at HEB, at the Jerusalem HEB, right? They're the ones who have the source for the food. The guests have run out of the provisions. The Greeks have run out of provisions that they brought with them. And so the food's going to have to come. So here go the Hebraic believers. They're gathering food and they know where the Hebraic widows are. And they're delivering food to those widows, but they're not figuring out where the Greek-speaking widows are. Where are they all? Where are they all staying?
Are Greeks considered Gentiles?
No,
No.
these are all Jews,
Okay.
but they're from all over the empire, the Roman Empire. And so, but they're all living in camps, right? They're all living in camps and tents or at inns, or then they're spread out around the city. And so they don't necessarily know how. All right, so what happens? So the 12 called the whole group of disciples together and said, now this maybe this is 4,000 people. All right. It is not right for us to neglect the word of God to wait on tables, but carefully select from among you, brothers, 7 men who are well attested, full of the Spirit and of wisdom, whom we may put in charge of the necessary tasks. So they look for people who already recognized as leaders amongst their people, right? And we want to put them in charge of making sure all the widows get food. All right. But we will devote ourselves to prayer and ministry of the word. The proposal will please the entire group. So they chose Stephen, Philip, Prochorus, Nicanor, Timon, Parmenas, Nicholas, a Gentile convert to Judaism, from Antioch. Now, these 7 names are all Greek names. So there was a problem with the Hebraic believers distributing food and getting it to the Greek widows. The 7 deacons, the 7 ministers, the 7 men chosen to make sure the food distribution happens were all Greek. They're all Greek speaking. They're all from outside of Judea. And the point is, we took the group with the least amount of power and control in this situation, and we gave them power and control in this situation as a group. That's very significant. Because it's very much the opposite of what's happening with the formation of Babel. We're taking a language group and we are creating a dominance and a control of culture based on making a name for themselves. And we're going over here and saying, we're going to take the group with the least amount of power and control, and we're going to raise them up so that there's equity across both language groups, which is actually multiple language groups. We're going to give equity of control across all the groups. This is very, very significant. And I understand that's not how we typically read it. I mean, I don't know how you read it. I know that I grew up looking for all of the checklists to verify that I was in the right church. Okay. And I looked for, examples of baptism and taking communion every Sunday. And that's what I looked for when I read Acts. But I've missed some stuff in the reading, because one of the marks of the church is multi-ethnicity. That's a mark of the church that we never emphasized in my lifetime. Right? And if you go visit Lake Como Church of Christ, which I highly recommend doing, if you go visit one Sunday, you will realize that's not a multi-ethnic church. It's a one ethnic church with a few other ethnicities mingled in. But if you go visit La Siempre Familia in South Fort Worth around Rosemont, what you will discover is a multi-ethnic church, even though they're all speaking Spanish. Because they're El Salvadorians and Guatemalans and Hondurans and Mexicans. And they are an unusual church, a very unusual church. And they've had lots of struggles. They've had a really hard time surviving, because being multi-ethnic is very difficult. If you're an all Mexican church, you don't have the same problems that La Siempre Familia has. Does that make sense to you, what I'm saying? It's difficult. If you have rich people and poor people, if you have people of different languages and cultures and backgrounds, if you mix those together, it's a struggle. Brenda and I'm gonna close with this. Brenda and I went for a walk with Brooke and Kevin in Los Angeles from their house to go get donuts. So it was about a half-mile walk, would you say? Half mile or so walk to go get California donuts, which they think are the best donuts they've ever had in their life. And I hope they never watch this class, because I mean, they were fancy. Fruit Loops on a donut's a cool thing to me, but whatever. But on the way, we're walking by this giant church building built in 1929. Big stone edifice. It's gorgeous. Stained glass windows, Gothic architecture. It's gorgeous. And I said, hold on, time out. And so we all stopped, and I said, that used to be a synagogue. And Brooke was like, what? And I said, look, there's menorahs on both sides of the doors. And look, way up at the top, at the point, you see that stained glass thing? Well, it wasn't stained glass, it was like a brass thing or something. That circle up at the top, it's got a Star of David engraved in it, but they've painted a white cross over the top of it. Right? There's big incense censers hanging on the sides of the building. Big, iron censers that have lights in them. This is a Jewish synagogue. So we walked across the street, and on the cornerstone, it says, temple, whatever. I know it wasn't temple. It was congregation something. I've got a picture of it. And, established in 1901, built, erected in 1927 or 29. And sure enough, it's a Korean Presbyterian church in what used to be a synagogue. That's what LA looks like. Okay. I mean, all of the language on the building is Korean. Okay. And that is a testimony to what the church looked like. And the point I'm trying to make, the single point I'm trying to make is that welcoming strangers, not killing our neighbors, requires an Act 6 type intentional posture of making space and room for people who are different. Right? So that, you know, on a Wednesday night, if Nicole Bursey says to me, you know, I've been on Wednesday nights, this is during COVID or pre-COVID, we were doing a deal and I would play a music video because I'm not a great song leader. And so I'd play a music video for us to sing along with. And one day I picked up Nicole Bursey to bring her to church and she said, hey, can we play this song in church tonight? And, you know, it was a Black gospel song. And I was like, you know what? Sure, we're going to. And all of us clapped along wide-eyed because we really didn't know what to do. Right? But that was intentionally making room for diversity in unity. And until that happens, last story. Don't know what your thoughts are about the Promise Keepers Conference. Lots of great stuff happened to me at Promise Keepers. A lot of good things happened because of Promise Keepers. One year, Tony Evans was speaking on racial healing in the church and the call for racial healing. Dr. Tony Evans is a Black preacher from South Dallas. And he said, I'm going to stop. I'm going to stop in the middle of my talk. And I want you to gather up with people you're sitting near in huddles. And I want you to discuss what your church looks like and why your church is probably monocultural. Tony had received a lot of heat for actively recruiting white people to come to Oak Cliff Bible Fellowship. And so I had arrived late. I know that surprises you. And the only seats left were actually behind the stage up high. And the only people around me were Black people. So I got down with my Black brothers and I said, okay, guys, look, you know I'm not supposed to dominate the conversation here, but I attend a white congregation that has, you know, a few Asian people and very few Black people in our congregation. And we're in a neighborhood that is 40% minorities. We're only 60% Caucasian. And I said, what do we do? How do we change? And I mean, rapid fire. They didn't have to think about it. Do you have anybody on stage of color? Never. Do you have any ministry positions, people in ministry positions of color? Not one. Do you have Sunday school teachers of color? One. And who also, by the way, was an elder at the church, which was a big move, right? Guess what we did? And it had nothing to do with me. I went back and told that to the elders at Alta Mesa, but guess what they did? They hired an Asian youth minister. They hired a Black worship leader / youth minister. And guess what happened? People of color started attending Alta Mesa. I mean, just like magic. One, simply because we said this is a place you're welcome. With intentionality moving towards diversity. It made all the difference. It was huge. So I'm not suggesting important next steps for Oak Ridge. I'm simply saying, if we're going to not kill our neighbors, it has to begin by welcoming our neighbors into our life. That's where it has to begin. Obviously, class time is over.
I really want to have last words.
I'm sorry.
I know.
Go.
I'm gonna say, you go.
No.
Okay, so for us here, right, in this little tiny world that we call home, I'm not really sure how we reach that, because Friday night, we went to James's thing, which is our young Black man, and we went to their thing, we'll talk about that later. But he his brother Tony made the point that, the black population in Parker County is 3%. We feel really bad because we don't have a large diversity. But I don't know that we can get one where we live. You know, I mean, doesn't mean we shouldn't try. We definitely should try.
It's a great conversation. If you'll remind me next week, I'd really like to address that. Because I've been thinking about that since the 2020 census.